Hello and welcome to another Alleyways Podcast slash live stream for those of you watching on Facebook. This time, I want to talk about my roads. Why are they so darn expensive? You really have to get down to the source of what cities are doing with their money. So they think about expand. Cities always want to expand. They're like an organism. They always want to grow. So part of the problem with why the roads, and not just roads, most infrastructure is so expensive is because cities expand without thinking about any return on their investment. When I say investment, if a city is expanding, they have to spend money to do that on building things like streets and culverts and sewers. So they don't look at, should we be expanding into this area, putting in all this infrastructure, and what type of return will we get? The type of return you would get as a city would be your property taxes, more people moving in, spending more money in the city. So they don't really consider, if we spend all this money to build out into a new subdivision, will we get enough people moving in here to make it worth the funds that are being spent to create an area where growth can occur? So that's like one way they expand. The other way is through annexations. So say there's an area outside of a city and they've got large enough that the city starts looking at them slobbering on getting the property tax from this area over here with all these nice houses. But they don't consider, cities have codes and they require, if people are going to live in these areas, they have to meet certain codes. So this area has been outside of the city's jurisdiction this whole time. So now that they're going to be annexed, the city would have to bring them up to code. They'd have to put in sidewalks. They have to add them to the sewer system. They'd have to bring them onto the water system because most of these places have their own wells, or they would have, septic tanks. So the city has to build all that out, and they don't think about that. They just see that dollar sign from, the property taxes they'd be getting from all these houses. And just to use an example of my local area, well, not really local, on the other side of the state in Omaha, they annexed quite a bit. And they ran into issues where they were annexing areas and they weren't really building the roads up to standards or putting in sidewalks and whatnot. And eventually people started suing the city to make this happen. So of course the city had to spend that money. So, they had some upfront property tax money, but now all the taxpayers down the road have to bear the burden of that easy money up front to bring this area up to standards now. And, part of the problem too is when you're going to expand to an area, a city will hire engineers to engineer the project. And of course, an engineer makes more money on a bigger project. So our engineer is going to want to be, you kind of get a collusion by default from all these engineers designing projects, because is an engineer going to want to spend his time designing some smaller project for a city? No, they want the biggest project possible. So when these cities are bidding out projects, they might not even be able to find anybody to work on developing a smaller project. So it's all these bigger projects that end up happening. And that's not, I don't think there's some sort of civil engineer mafia that's colluding to make sure that nobody builds smaller projects. The only thing that happens is gigantic projects so they can all make more money. But the thing is, these engineers are taxpayers too, and I'm sure they probably bitch about the amount of money that cities are spending, but they're complicit in designing these projects. And a lot of times cities won't maintain what they have because they just figure, well, we're going to build this big project down the road. Why should we bother maintaining what we have here if we're just going to build a nice big one? I mean, you see that a lot with schools, probably a lot of roads. You'll see that, we're going to widen this out eventually. So, why do we need to maintain this? We're just going to end up widening it out. So there's a lot of kicking the can down the road when they do that, because say the funds fall through or the funds dry up. Now they got this road that hasn't been worked on for for 10 or 12 years because they figured, it's going to be widened out. So we don't need to put any money into it. And that's kind of the growth model of most cities. I mean, they have to expand. It's kind of a vicious circle. They have to expand to cover their current expenses. So they just keep building more and they keep racking up more expenses for people down the road. And it just keeps building and building until, the wheels fall off and the whole system breaks, because they have to fund repairs on their older stuff that they're not replacing. So they expand to get more tax money, and then so they can afford to fix their older stuff. But now the stuff they expanded to is going to be breaking. So they just have to keep expanding and expanding. And, they expand into a new area and they don't consider, like I mentioned earlier, that you need culverts, streetlights, fire protection, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on for things you need when you expand. And the way that cities have typically looked at, I mean, if you look at taxes like a pie, I mean, the easiest way to split a pie between two starving people is you just bake another pie. And that's what cities have been doing. So they just keep baking another pie by expanding and increasing their tax base. But all right, well, now there's 4 people and you only have 1 pie. What's going to happen? And that's why you see all these infrastructure issues where things are just falling apart because, some areas are still expanding, but most areas aren't expanding like they used to. And they have to maintain everything that they expanded. Because like I said, you got to expand to pay for it. So if you're not expanding, you're going to have issues paying for it. It's like everything we've got going on now, healthcare, education, entitlement spending, defense spending. Our whole country pretty much runs on growth. So when growth slows down, the government's overwhelmed and they can't beg, borrow, or steal enough to make things work. And at some point the whole system falls apart. So it's either the whole thing from the city level all the way up to the federal level is just going to start falling apart. So, I mean, what's the solution to that? Well, probably, slowing your growth. I mean, the way cities and a lot of the stuff at the federal level grows right now, it's inorganic growth. It's just getting money pumped into it because somebody thinks it's a good idea, like, building a 4-lane highway because you're going to have more traffic, because out to an industrial park, because, you're going to get people expanding out there. That's not very organic at all. You're just pumping funds in there, hoping something will happen. And even if it does happen, you don't know if your investment's going to be worth it. And, the cities have kind of all been playing a game of chicken with each other on this because, if you don't expand out there and build this industrial park and use tax money on it, well, there's another city down the road that's willing to do it, and so on and so forth. But, that's not a sustainable model. I mean, at some point, somebody's going to crash out and it's just going to work its way all the way like a bunch of dominoes. Everything's just going to start crashing. So you got to have a tempered growth, let it be organic. Look at the long-term cost of your expansion. A lot of cities don't even consider, all right, we're going to annex this area because we need more tax dollars. So, but it's going to cost, $2 million. They'll just throw a number out there, $2 million to bring it up to city code on streets and everything. But we're only going to bring in, $10,000-$20,000 in property taxes. That's not a good investment. I mean, they don't even think about return on investment with this sort of thing. Municipalities they're very short-sighted, and that might be because you got people in there that are only in there for 4 years, so they don't really look down the road. And I hate to say it, but it's kind of a boomer mentality that that short term, it's not going to be my problem. And I noticed that a lot of the younger people involved in politics tend to have more of a long-term view on things. So thanks to Gen X for that. We'll see what the millennials do. So you got tempered growth, look at your long-term costs, and you have to maintain what you currently have. You can't just push off maintenance hoping that you're going to grow enough that you're going to have enough tax dollars in a couple years to maintain things. You have to slow your roll and just deal with what you have. It's like you don't do that in your own personal finances. It's like taking out more credit cards when you don't have enough money, and you just keep taking out credit cards hoping you're going to win the lottery, or you're going to get a huge raise at work. I mean, that's how cities are going right now. They're hoping they're going to get a huge raise at work and be able to pay for all the stuff that they've bankrolled up to now. And that's what it is. That's why your infrastructure is so expensive, because, to sum it up, the engineers probably drive the price up on big projects, and the cities are willing to pay it because they just keep expanding and expanding. You can't do it forever. Thanks for tuning in.